Let's get more on the reactions in Europe, and I'm joined from London by Russ Mould, Investment Director at AJ Bell. Welcome to the program. Now,
Good evening,
we've just
Girish.
heard there from Ursula von der Leyen, and she also said that tariffs will be dire. The consequences will be dire for millions of people in the continent. So who might get hurt the most when it comes to Europe?
Well, Germany is very much one of the countries in the vanguard, and what Trump is looking to do is take on those countries where he feels America runs a substantial trade deficit. And if you look at the degree of tariffs that's been imposed around the world, generally, the higher the trade deficit or trade surplus that you have, the higher trade deficit that America has, the higher and more punitive the tariffs have become. Germany is already in the firing line with automotive, and there are Denmark, Ireland, one or two others in there as well.
And in the case of Germany, a major, a car manufacturer, will it have to just diversify, look elsewhere, look at Asia, Africa to expand its markets?
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, the Germans have seen this coming because they do have some manufacturing facilities in the USA, in Carolina, for example. So they have tried to prepare for this, but equally, they have even more manufacturing facilities in Mexico and absorb an awful lot of parts from Canada. And I think that's what's caught them out. It's not just where you actually assemble the equipment, it's where you get the parts from as well. And that's what's making it difficult. So on top of the existing steel, auto, and aluminium tariffs, we now have the flat 20% European tariff as well.
Yes, Russ, a short time ago we received news, it's from a senior EU official who's saying that the EU member states are set to vote next Wednesday, April the 9th, on countermeasures to US steel and aluminium tariffs. What's likely to happen there?
Well, as usual, the European Union, you need a substantial majority among the members, and that's not always desperately easy to achieve. So there could be quite a degree of horse trading there. But European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, as you were just hearing, does seem keen to press ahead with retaliatory measures if the Trump administration doesn't back down, which it doesn't seem keen to do. So we'll now have to see what the members agree upon, if they can agree, and then which industries they decide to hit and with what degree of tariff.
And you are in London, and the UK, just like Australia, have only been hit by the baseline tariffs of 10%. What's been the reaction there?
Yeah, I mean, you've got one or two commentators here suggesting that's a bit of a Brexit dividend because with the UK having separated itself from the economic bloc. I suspect that's a little bit self-serving. I think the UK was hit less because according to the American data, America runs a trade surplus with the UK. All right, the UK data show that we run a trade surplus with them, so you pay your money, you take your choice. But I'm not sure it's a Brexit dividend. I think it's a matter of just how the statistics fall out in terms of trade flows. But the UK stock market at the moment, it's down 1% and a little bit. The companies that have been worst hit are those that export to America but have big supply chains in Asia. So you're looking at luxury goods companies like Burberry, shoe companies like Doc Martens, and clothing retailers. They're the ones who are really in the firing line at the moment.
And even with these tariffs, Russ, the UK still wants a trade deal with the US, and the government's come out and said that they want to make the case there. How do you see this proceeding forward?
Well, we've been pursuing that trade deal since 2020, so it's a fairly long, ongoing process. I'm sure that the tariffs we're hoping here in the UK that we can now reach a fairly rapid deal, but given it's taken us 5 years to not reach anything yet, that will be difficult. And President Trump's beef isn't just with tariffs, it's with things like the value-added or sales tax that we have here. And I can't see any way in which the UK will look to abandon that. It earns about a sixth of its income revenue, of its taxation revenue from the value-added sales tax. There's no way that the government here will want to set a precedent of bowing to pressure from anybody to give them a deal there. So I think there are so many wheels within wheels that it may be just that some of Trump's demands are so excessive, it proves very, very hard to get that long-awaited and long-hoped-for deal.
Yes, and many are already labeling this a global trade war, but many nations are going through a cost of living crisis. No one seems to be immune from it. So, could this have come at a worse time?
It's going to be really interesting because so many of Trump's voters you would expect could be those who are perhaps the most affected by the way in which prices will immediately jump in the next few days. And some products that America doesn't grow for itself agriculture-wise will be an awful lot more expensive. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this. But if you look at the history of tariffs, I know that a lot of economists right now are worried about inflation, as you correctly say, Gurish. But if you look back to the 1930s, when America put the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act on, and then everybody retaliated, and there was a shrinking in global trade, that actually contributed to a global period of deflation. Because in the end, what's the best cure for high prices? It's high prices. because people either can't afford to pay them or refuse to pay them or seek a cheaper alternative. So although a lot of people are worried about inflation right now, there may be one-off hit there. If these tariffs stick around and there aren't any deals, you would worry that we may be slipping to something a little bit nearer the 30s, which would be a disinflationary or deflationary period, something that I don't think many people are prepared for right now.
Yes, and is it Donald Trump's, I suppose, overall game for by sort of listing all the countries in terms of percentages with the tariffs that are being slugged for individual national leaders to perhaps deal with the U.S. and the Trump administration unilaterally as opposed to national blocs like the European Union?
Yeah, I'm sure it makes it easy if we're America to try to deal with people individually. It would probably make it easy for them to pick them off and get a better deal on a case-by-case basis. But if you look at the Republican Party more broadly and read the commentary that's coming out of the US, there are several different strands to Republican thinking. One sees tariffs as an ends to a mean, a deal, as you've been suggesting, to get more advantageous trade terms for America. Some are viewing it more ideologically as actually we're going to get some revenues here. We can use this to cut the much-hated income tax in the US. And then you have the president himself talking about short-term pain, higher prices, maybe slower growth, in exchange for long-term gain of onshore jobs and higher long-term growth. So there seem to be lots of different goals attached to this one policy. It's not the most coherent program, therefore, and it'd be intriguing to see which of those goals wins out. I guess ultimately probably the president's ones, because he's the person in charge, and that seems to be one that will probably take the longest to play out.
Yes, and Russ, finally, what do you make of Australia's approach, which is not to retaliate, simply because it will serve to only hurt Australian consumers?
Yeah, and that's putting it in the camp with the UK and Mexico, where the UK doesn't seem in any way keen to retaliate and is looking for a solution. I think the Australian plan seems to be the same, whereas China, Canada, the EU are going down the more combative route. We'll see whose policy works out best.
And finally, I mean, the big question is the R word. Are we expecting in the months to come the US and countries in Europe to experience a recession?
Well, I think that would be the most negative outcome, and it's the one that certainly financial markets aren't priced for right now, which is why we've seen all of this volatility in the past few months, and why we've seen the gold price go through the ceiling, because investors have been looking for a haven asset and a bolt hole to hide. It's interesting that the Atlanta Fed GDP Now survey is showing America's economy shrinking in the first 3 months of this year. There's a little bit of distortion there because of heavy imports of gold, and imports subtract from GDP, exports add to them. But I think if we do get a recession in the US, it will spook a lot of people. But the numbers are going to be very muddy because a lot of companies have seen these tariffs coming. They've been preparing for them, stockpiling inventory. Consumers have been hunkering down. The first 6 months of this year will be very, very difficult to interpret. We'll probably have a better picture of what's going on towards the back end of the year.
Okay, Russ Mould, really good to get your analysis today. Thank you so much.
Well.